This is the Vietnam you think you know, but not the one you're about to see.
At the eastern edge of Southeast Asia, where mountains tumble into coastline and ancient rivers carve through limestone that has stood for 300 million years, lies a country that refuses every simple definition the world has tried to give it. Here, terraced rice fields climb impossibly steep hillsides in shades of green that seem digitally invented. Ancient imperial cities preserve architecture that survived centuries of war. A coastline stretching over 3,000 kilometers holds beaches, lagoons, and reef systems of staggering beauty. And street food sold from a plastic stool on a cracked pavement is, without exaggeration, among the finest cooking on earth.
For decades, the outside world saw Vietnam through a single lens: a war, a tragedy, a lesson. What that narrow frame erased was everything else. A civilization over 4,000 years old, a culture that resisted Chinese domination for a millennium before Western powers ever arrived. A people who rebuilt, replanted, and reimagined their country with a speed that still astonishes development economists. A nation where over 97 million people live with a ferocious appetite for the future, while honoring a past most countries would find too heavy to carry. This is Vietnam, and what it actually contains will dismantle everything you thought you already understood. The bay that stopped people mid-sentence. In the northeastern corner of the country, where the Gulf of Tonkin meets the land, nearly 2,000 limestone islands rise from emerald water like the spines of something vast, sleeping just beneath the surface. This is Ha Long Bay, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most immediately recognizable seascapes on the planet. But photographs, no matter how technically accomplished, fail to capture what it actually feels like to move through it by boat in the early morning, when mist fills the space between the islands and the water holds the color of polished jade, and the only sound is the engine of a wooden junk cutting slowly through absolute stillness. The limestone casts here were formed over 300 million years by the interaction of seawater and soluble rock. Time carved grottos into their interior. Stalactites hang from cave ceilings in formations that would take another 300 million years to fully understand. Fishing villages, built entirely on floating platforms, have occupied these waters for generations. Families who were born on the water, who have never lived on land, who navigate by current and wind and the particular smell of the air before a storm. But Ha Long Bay is not the only bay that earns that quality of silence. 4 hours south by road, Lan Ha Bay offers the same limestone architecture with a fraction of the tourist traffic. Cat Ba Island, the largest island in the bay, rises above the water with forests so dense that sunlight barely penetrates the canopy. The Cat Ba langur, one of the rarest primates on Earth, survives here in a population of fewer than 90 individuals. Conservationists have spent decades protecting this tiny remnant population from extinction. Standing on a cliff top on Cat Ba and watching the sun move across the bay below, the weight of geological time becomes something almost physical. This landscape was old before humans existed. It will be here long after we are gone. Hanoi, a city that carries its age gracefully. Vietnam's capital sits on the banks of the Red River in the country's northern reaches, a city of 7 million people that manages to feel simultaneously ancient and alive. The Old Quarter, a tightly packed maze of 36 streets, each historically devoted to a single trade, preserves an urban layout that has functioned for over 1,000 years. Silk Street still sells silk. Tin Street still rings with metal. Paper Street still offers offerings for the dead. The trades have evolved, but the bones of the city remain. Hoan Kiem Lake sits at the heart of the Old Quarter. Every morning, before the heat arrives, elderly residents practice Tai Chi on its shores. Lotus flowers open slowly on the water's surface. The red wooden hook bridge, arching over to a small island shrine, has appeared in Vietnamese art and poetry for centuries. A legend holds that a giant golden turtle once inhabited this lake, and that after the Vietnamese hero Le Loi used a magical sword to drive out Chinese invaders in the 15th century, the turtle rose from the water to reclaim the weapon on behalf of the heavens. The lake's name means Lake of the Restored Sword. The story is still told to children as if it happened last season. Hanoi's relationship with time is unlike any other capital city in Southeast Asia. French colonial architecture lines the boulevards of the French Quarter. Buildings constructed between the 1880s and the 1940s that sit with surprising ease alongside pagodas 1,000 years older. The Temple of Literature, built in 1070, was Vietnam's first national university. Its courtyards preserve stone stelae mounted on stone tortoises, each recording the name and home village of scholars who passed. The imperial examinations. The oldest dates to 1484. Walking past them, reading the names carved into stone 5 centuries ago, produces the particular vertigo that comes from genuine contact with historical depth. The street food of Hanoi is its own kind of history. Pho, the aromatic beef noodle soup that the world now recognizes, originated in the north. The broth is made from beef bones, slow simmered with charred onion and ginger for a minimum of 6 hours. Star anise, cinnamon and cloves perfume the liquid. Rice noodles, sliced beef, fresh herbs, bean sprouts, and a squeeze of lime complete the bowl. A single bowl of pho, eaten at 5 in the morning from a street stall surrounded by motorbikes and cigarette smoke and the noise of a city waking up, is an experience that no restaurant in any other country has ever successfully replicated. The specific combination of broth temperature, herb freshness, and surrounding chaos is inseparable from the meal itself. Then comes bun cha, the grilled pork noodle dish that drew a former American president and a celebrity chef to a plastic table in a Hanoi alleyway, in a moment that briefly made the entire world pay attention to a dish Vietnamese people had been eating for generations. The imperial city that outlasted its empire. 5 hours south of Hanoi by train, the city of Hue sits beside the Perfume River in the narrow waist of the country. For over 140 years, from 1802 to 1945, Hue served as the capital of the Nguyen dynasty, the last imperial ruling family of Vietnam. The imperial citadel they constructed here enclosed a forbidden purple city, modeled on the imperial palace in Beijing, a complex of ceremonial halls, royal chambers, libraries and gardens, surrounded by walls 6 meters thick and a moat 3 kilometers in circumference. The American War left Hue devastated. In the 1968 Tet Offensive, some of the conflict's most ferocious urban combat took place inside these walls. Buildings that had survived 2 centuries of weather and political turbulence were reduced to rubble in weeks. What remained was less than half of what had stood before. The restoration effort that has continued for the past 3 decades represents one of the most complex heritage reconstruction projects in Southeast Asia. Craftsmen trained in techniques documented in Nguyen dynasty records are rebuilding structures by hand. Lacquer paintings are being replicated from surviving fragments. Ceremonial costumes are being rewoven on traditional looms. A civilization is being patiently reassembled from its own surviving evidence. Outside the citadel walls, the royal tombs of the Nguyen emperors are scattered across the pine-forested hills south of the city. Each emperor designed his own tomb during his lifetime, creating complexes that combined mausoleum, palace, and pleasure garden. Tu Duc's tomb reflects the emperor's philosophical temperament. A lake filled with lotus, pavilions for writing poetry, a library stocked with classical texts, and a garden designed for quiet contemplation. He reportedly spent afternoons here composing verse and fishing, the business of empire, conducted from a place of deliberate beauty. Hue cuisine is its own argument for visiting. The city developed a cooking tradition during the imperial era that remains the most refined and elaborately conceived in all of Vietnam. Royal chefs competed to produce dishes of extraordinary delicacy, miniature portions of intense flavor, designed to impress emperors already accustomed to the best of everything. Bun Khoai, a crispy rice flour pancake filled with pork and shrimp and eaten wrapped in mustard leaf and rice paper, arrives with a fermented peanut dipping sauce that takes 3 days to prepare. Bun Bo Hue, the city's signature beef noodle soup, carries a heat and complexity that distinguishes it immediately from its Hanoi cousin. The broth is simmered with lemongrass and shrimp paste. The chili oil turns it red. The flavor settles into the back of the throat and stays there. The ancient town that time agreed to protect. An hour south of Hue, the city of Hoi An occupies a position on the Tu Bon River estuary that made it one of the most important trading ports in Southeast Asia from the 15th to the 19th century. Japanese merchants built a covered wooden bridge across the river in 1603. It still stands. Chinese merchants constructed communal assembly halls decorated with hand-carved wooden screens, lacquered altars and silk lanterns that have hung in the same positions for centuries. Vietnamese merchants adapted their shophouses to accommodate international clientele while maintaining domestic traditions behind the commercial facades. When the river silted up in the 19th century and trading ships moved to Da Nang, Hoi An was effectively bypassed by the modern economy. The buildings that would have been demolished to make way for development in any other city survived here through irrelevance. By the time the world recognized their value as heritage, the old town was almost entirely intact. It is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and one of the best preserved trading port towns anywhere in Asia. At night, the streets of Hoi An are lit by hundreds of silk lanterns strung between buildings in every color. Tourists and locals move through the same narrow lanes. Tailors sitting in doorways sew silk garments with practiced speed. Riverboats carry lanterns whose reflections multiply in the water below. The whole scene feels theatrical, but is, in fact, simply what this place has become. A living town that also happens to be a museum of itself. The mountains that divide a country. Running north to south through the center of Vietnam, the Trong Son mountain range, known in the west as the Annamite Range, forms the country's geological spine. It also served, historically, as the boundary between distinct civilizations. To the east, coastal Vietnamese kingdoms traded with China and maintained Confucian bureaucratic systems. To the west, highland peoples developed entirely separate languages, agricultural systems, and spiritual practices that persist today. The Hai Van Pass, where this mountain range meets the sea, was for centuries the political frontier between Vietnamese kingdoms to the north and the Cham civilization to the south. A French colonial railway tunnel now carries most traffic through the mountain, but the road across the pass remains one of the most dramatic drives on the continent. At the summit, an abandoned French military bunker sits beside ruins from an even earlier fortification. Below, the South China Sea stretches north and south simultaneously. The coastal plain of Da Nang visible on one side, the lagoon system of Hue visible on the other. Two climates, two landscapes, two worlds separated by a single mountain road. The Cham civilization that vanished but left its evidence everywhere. For nearly 1,000 years, the kingdom of Champa dominated the central and southern coasts of what is now Vietnam. The Cham people, of Austronesian origin and Hindu belief, built tower temples of extraordinary refinement across the coastline and highlands. These brick sanctuaries, constructed without mortar, using a binding technique that modern engineers still cannot fully replicate, were dedicated to the Hindu deity Shiva. Carved with Apsara dancers and mythological creatures of immense delicacy, they represent one of the great artistic traditions of the ancient world. My Son, 40 kilometers west of Hoi An, is the spiritual heartland of the Cham Empire. Over 70 structures once stood in this valley, built between the 4th and 14th centuries. American bombing in the 1960s and 70s destroyed many beyond recovery. What remains is still extraordinary. Towers that have survived 1,000 monsoon seasons lean slightly, but refuse to fall. Carved sandstone blocks depict mythologies from a civilization that was effectively erased by Vietnamese expansion to the south and Khmer pressure from the west. The Cham people still exist, primarily in the Central Highlands and the Mekong Delta, practicing a form of Hinduism and Islam maintained through centuries of political marginalization. Their textile traditions, musical instruments, and ceremonial practices survive in communities that the dominant culture long overlooked. Recently, Vietnamese scholars have begun taking this heritage seriously, a recognition, arriving late, that the country's story is more plural than a single ethnic narrative allows. The Central Highlands and the people who never left the forest. Moving inland from the coast,
The terrain rises into red basalt plateaus covered with coffee plantations that supply a significant portion of the world's Robusta coffee production. Vietnam is the second largest coffee exporting nation on Earth.
A fact that surprises most people who associate the commodity with Latin America. The highlands were forested and thinly populated by indigenous Montagnard peoples before French colonial plantations transformed the landscape. The legacy of that transformation includes both an agricultural economy of considerable value and ecological disruption whose effects continue to accumulate. The Ida, the Jarai, the Banar, and dozens of other highland groups maintain longhouse traditions, communal land practices, and animist spiritual systems that existed long before any lowland civilization arrived. Communal houses with soaring roof ridgelines tower above village clearings. Carved wooden grave markers, figures frozen in postures of grief or celebration surrounding the tombs of the recently dead, represent a funerary art tradition of extraordinary power. Music made from gongs tuned to each other through years of patient adjustment produces sound unlike anything in the lowland Vietnamese tradition. UNESCO recognized the Central Highlands gong culture as an intangible heritage of humanity in 2005. The recognition was overdue by several centuries. Ho Chi Minh City, the engine room of a nation in motion. In the far south, the city formerly known as Saigon moves at a pace that makes every other Vietnamese city feel contemplative by comparison. 9 million people, hundreds of thousands of motorbikes, streets that begin filling before dawn and empty only briefly between 3 and 4 in the morning. The energy is not aggressive, it is purposeful. A city that knows it is building something and has decided to build it fast. The French colonial era produced the grand boulevards, the Notre Dame Cathedral, built entirely from materials imported from France, the Central Post Office, with its vaulted iron ceiling designed by Gustave Eiffel's engineering company. These buildings still stand, slightly incongruous among the glass towers rising on every side, architectural evidence of an occupation that ended over 60 years ago, but left its mark in stone. The War Remnants Museum addresses a more recent history with absolute directness. Photographs taken by journalists during the American conflict document things that no written description adequately conveys. The courtyard displays military hardware, including aircraft and armored vehicles used during the war. The upper floors contain exhibitions that have made visitors from every country leave in silence. It is not comfortable. It is not designed to be. It is designed to ensure that what happened here is not aesthetically filtered or narratively softened into something easier to absorb. The museum receives over 500,000 visitors annually. A significant portion of them are American. Many report that nothing in their education prepared them for what they see inside. Yet Ho Chi Minh City is not defined by its past in the way that cities shaped by tragedy so often are. The Bui Vien walking street runs until 4 in the morning on weekends. Rooftop bars above the Nguyen Hue pedestrian boulevard fill with a young population whose median age is just over 30. The city's restaurant scene has exploded in the past decade, with chefs reinterpreting southern Vietnamese cuisine using techniques they trained for in Europe, and then chose to bring home. Banh mi, the Vietnamese baguette sandwich that the French colonial era accidentally bequeathed to the country, is assembled here at dedicated stalls with a precision and speed that implies both muscle memory and genuine pride. The combination of French bread, Vietnamese pork preparations, pickled daikon and carrot, fresh coriander, sliced chili, and house-made mayonnaise produces a sandwich so balanced it renders every other version encountered elsewhere slightly disappointing. The Mekong Delta, where the river becomes the world. South of Ho Chi Minh City, the Mekong River breaks apart into 9 distributary channels before delivering its water to the South China Sea. The delta this creates, over 40,000 square kilometers of flat, intensely fertile land, is one of the most productive agricultural regions on the planet. Rice paddies, fruit orchards, fish farms, and floating markets occupy land that was largely swamp a century ago and was drained and cultivated by generations of determined farming families. The floating markets of Kai Rang and Kai Bay operate before dawn. Boats laden with wholesale quantities of fruit, vegetables, and dry goods cluster together in the river. Smaller boats weave between them, buying and selling. Each large boat hangs a sample of its primary cargo from a long bamboo pole, so buyers can identify the product from a distance without needing to draw alongside. This system, called Kaibil, meaning sample pole, has been the market's navigation technology for generations. It works with complete efficiency in darkness and in fog. Water defines everything here. Houses are built on stilts or on floating pontoons. Roads, where they exist at all, are narrow, elevated causeways between paddy fields. Children learn to paddle a boat before they learn to ride a bicycle. The delta's ecology, its fish populations, its flood cycles, its sediment deposits, are all changing as upstream dams in China, Laos, and Cambodia alter the river's hydrology. Communities that have read the annual flood as a calendar, planting and harvesting around its rhythms for generations, are finding the flood calendar increasingly unreliable. It is one of the most immediate examples anywhere of climate and infrastructure change affecting daily human life in real time. Sapa and the mountains of the far north. In the extreme northwest, where Vietnam shares a border with China, the Hoang Lien Son mountain range rises to heights that produce a cold, misty climate entirely unlike anything in the lowland south. Phan Xipang, the highest peak in Vietnam and in all of Indochina, reaches 3,143 meters above sea level. A cable car now carries tourists to its summit. Before the cable car arrived, it was a 3-day trek through cloud forest, moss-hung trees, and unpredictable mountain weather that only experienced guides and prepared hikers attempted. The rice terraces of Mu Chang Chai and the Sapa region represent an agricultural achievement as visually astonishing as anything in Southeast Asia. Over centuries, ethnic minority farmers of the Hmong, Dao, Tay, and other groups carved these steps into mountain slopes too steep for conventional cultivation, creating a system that holds water, prevents erosion, and produces rice at altitudes where it has no business growing. The gradient of some terraces approaches 45 degrees. The carving and maintenance of these fields without machinery represents thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about how water moves through a mountain landscape. The Hmong people, who have farmed this landscape for centuries, maintain textile traditions of extraordinary sophistication. Indigo-dyed fabric, embroidered with patterns whose meanings are encoded in community memory rather than written text, is produced entirely by hand. A single embroidered jacket can take several months to complete. Young women begin learning the techniques in early childhood, mastering increasingly complex patterns as they age. The garments are not primarily made for sale. They are made to be worn at festivals, to mark rites of passage, and to communicate identity, marital status, and clan affiliation to anyone within the community trained to read them. A nation that rebuilt itself in a single generation. In 1975, Vietnam was a country of bombed infrastructure, depleted agricultural land, a population traumatized by 3 decades of continuous warfare, and an economy effectively isolated from global trade by American sanctions. 45 million unexploded bombs and mines remained in the soil. Forests had been defoliated by chemical agents whose effects continue to cause birth defects and illness decades later. The humanitarian scale of what had to be rebuilt was almost beyond calculation. By 2020, Vietnam was one of the fastest-growing economies in Asia. Poverty rates had declined from over 58% in 1993 to under 5% by the second decade of the new century. Life expectancy had increased by over 20 years since the end of the war. The country had become a major manufacturing hub for global electronics and textile companies. And the tourism industry, barely existing before the 1990s, was receiving over 18 million international visitors annually before the pandemic interrupted the trajectory. This transformation did not happen through accident or resource extraction. It happened through a policy shift called Doi Moi, meaning renovation, introduced in 1986. The government moved from a centrally planned economy toward a market-oriented system while maintaining single-party political control. The result was economic liberalization without the political disruption that similar transitions produced elsewhere. The approach is not without its tensions. Press freedom, political dissent, and minority rights remain areas where international human rights organizations document ongoing concerns. The complexity of Vietnam's transformation includes both what has been achieved and what remains unresolved. A country that has rebuilt itself in a single generation is also a country still negotiating the terms of its own future. The Phong Nha Caves and the darkness beneath the earth. In Quang Binh Province in central Vietnam, the Phong Nha Ke Bang National Park conceals beneath its forested limestone plateau the largest cave system ever discovered. Son Doong, mapped in 2009 by a British caving team working with a Vietnamese guide who had first found the entrance 2 decades earlier, is so large that a Boeing 747 could fly through its main chamber without touching the walls. The cave contains its own weather system. Clouds form inside it. A river runs through it. Daylight enters through collapsed ceiling sections called dolines, creating underground gardens where trees grow in isolated pools of sunlight, while darkness stretches for kilometers in every direction. A single guided expedition into Son Doong requires 5 days inside the cave, costs several $1,000s per person, and is limited to a small number of visitors annually to protect the environment. The cave was formed over approximately 3 million years as water dissolved the limestone from below. The formations inside, stalactites, stalagmites, cave pearls, and rimstone pools, have taken tens of thousands of years to grow to their current dimensions. A careless hand can destroy in a moment what time spent millions of years constructing. The limitations placed on access are not obstacles to tourism. They are evidence that Vietnam has learned something from watching other countries sacrifice their natural heritage to short-term economic gain. Paradise Road and the coast that keeps revealing itself. Stretching southward from Da Nang, the Vietnamese coastline presents an uninterrupted sequence of beaches, headlands, fishing villages, and island archipelagos that rival any coastal scenery in Southeast Asia. Mai Kay Beach outside Da Nang was used as a rest and recreation facility by American troops during the war. The same water that soldiers swam in between combat missions is now lined with luxury resorts serving travelers from across the world. The beach itself, 8 kilometers of unbroken white sand facing warm South China Sea water, is objectively one of the finest urban beaches on the continent. Phu Quoc Island, off the southwestern coast, spent decades as a remote outpost known primarily to backpackers willing to endure basic accommodation in exchange for waters of extraordinary clarity and fish populations that had recovered in the relative absence of commercial fishing pressure. Infrastructure investment over the past decade has transformed the northern end of the island into an international resort destination, while the southern national park remains forested and wild. The boundary between development and preservation is visible in real time, and which side ultimately wins is still genuinely uncertain. The Con Dao Archipelago, 30 kilometers off the southern coast, carries a darker history. The French colonial administration established a prison here in 1862 that Vietnamese nationalists and later Viet Cong prisoners described as among the most brutal in Asia. The tiger cages, stone cells so small that prisoners could not stand upright, held thousands of political detainees under conditions that photographs made international news in 1970. Today, the former prison operates as a museum. The island itself has become one of Vietnam's most pristine natural refuges. Sea turtles nest on beaches that were once used for prisoner labor. Dugongs graze in the seagrass meadows of the surrounding marine protected area. The combination of historical weight and ecological beauty creates an atmosphere unlike any other place in the country. A culture built from convergence. Vietnamese civilization absorbed, adapted, and ultimately outlasted every external force that attempted to reshape it.
8,000 years of Chinese imperial rule transplanted Confucian ethics, bureaucratic governance, and classical written culture into Vietnamese society. Those systems were adopted, modified,
and eventually turned into tools of Vietnamese self-definition rather than instruments of foreign control. French colonialism left behind architecture, a Romanized writing system that replaced Chinese characters in the 20th century, baguettes, coffee culture, and the word for station, which entered Vietnamese as gare, from the French gare. American influence arrived through war and departed through it. But it left behind an English-language infrastructure, a generation with direct experience of Western culture, and a diaspora community of over 4 million Vietnamese Americans whose remittances and cultural exchange continue to shape the country from across the Pacific. What emerged from all these layers is a culture with a specifically Vietnamese center of gravity. The tradition of water puppetry, a performance art form developed in the Red River Delta over 1,000 years ago, in which wooden puppets perform on the surface of a waist-deep pool while the operators stand submerged behind a bamboo curtain, has no equivalent anywhere else. The 36 craft guilds of Hanoi's Old Quarter represent a commercial tradition that absorbed every external economic disruption and kept producing. The village communal houses, the ding, that dot the countryside from north to south, serve as administrative centers, places of worship, community gathering spaces, and architectural expressions of local identity simultaneously. They are still used for all 4 purposes. Vietnamese music operates on tonal principles and uses instruments, including the dan bao, a single-stringed instrument played with a vibrating rod, and the dan trang, a 16-stringed zither that produce sounds impossible to approximate on Western instruments. Classical court music from the Hui imperial era, called Nha Nhac, was recognized by UNESCO as an intangible heritage of humanity in 2003. Folk songs called Quan Ho, performed as a form of romantic, improvised dialogue between groups of young men and women, remain embedded in northern Vietnamese festival culture as a living social tradition rather than a museum piece. The country contains multitudes. Vietnam runs 1,600 kilometers from north to south, spanning the distance between London and Cairo. The climate in Hanoi and the climate in Ho Chi Minh City are so different that the 2 cities require different wardrobes, different agricultural cycles, and different seasonal logic. The cuisine of the north emphasizes broth, subtlety, and the precise balance of a small number of ingredients. The cuisine of the south is sweeter, richer, and influenced by the agricultural abundance of the Mekong Delta. The cuisines of the central region, shaped by the imperial kitchen of Hui, combine both tendencies and add a heat and complexity that stands apart from both. 54 officially recognized ethnic groups live within the country's borders. The Kin majority accounts for approximately 86% of the population, but the remaining 14% represents a cultural diversity of extraordinary range. The Tay in the northern highlands, the Khmer in the southern delta, the Cham in the coastal center, the Hmong and Dao in the mountain northwest. Each group maintains distinct languages, spiritual practices, agricultural traditions, and material cultures. The Vietnamese state's relationship with its ethnic minorities is complicated as it is in every country where a dominant majority governs a diverse internal population. The complications are real, so is the diversity they occur within. As the light changes over Ha Long Bay, turning the limestone islands from grey to gold to silhouette in the space of a single hour, the scale of what Vietnam contains becomes briefly comprehensible. A country that carries 4,000 years of recorded civilization in a landscape of extraordinary natural force, where the bones of ancient kingdoms are embedded in living cities, where mountains that took 300 million years to form are being crossed daily by people on motorbikes carrying vegetables to a market that will open before dawn. Vietnam is not a simple story of recovery, although the recovery is real and remarkable. It is not simply a war memory, although the war is embedded in the landscape, the literature, the bodies of people still living with its chemical legacy. It is not simply an economic success story, although the economic transformation of the past 4 decades ranks among the most significant development achievements of the modern era. It is not simply a tourism destination, although it offers more sustained natural and cultural reward per kilometre travelled than almost anywhere else in Asia. It is all of these things at once, held together by a people who have demonstrated repeatedly and under conditions of extreme pressure a capacity for endurance that borders on the incomprehensible, who rebuilt cities from rubble, who reforested mountains, who kept making silk and pottery and music and water puppets and fur through everything. This is Vietnam. Not as the world's simplified version of it suggested, but as it has always been. Ancient, complicated, alive, and entirely itself. And the story, as it has always been in this country, is nowhere near finished.